In this video, I'm going to be covering all the differences I noticed with the Zombieman fight in One Punch Man Season 3. If you noticed anything I missed, please let me know down below, and maybe consider joining the Discord, where we yap and talk about anime production, and particularly One Punch Man Season 3. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the rest of the video. And if you like the color black, you're gonna love this episode because every single instance of blood is replaced with it. So there is a lot of differences here regarding its gore. Also, we're supposed to be able to hear Zombieman clumping down the corridor in his heels because he's wearing them on his boots. He isn't supposed to just stop at this panel. His axe is spotless here when it's supposed to be covered in blood. However, we're not supposed to immediately cut to Zombieman with, for some reason, a glow on him coming out from the shadows. You're supposed to see him at the other end of the corridor as the monsters turn to him because he calls to them. Then he throws the fuse box at them. Instead, we miss him cocking the gun, and the second the impact happens of the fuse box, he immediately is shooting already. Now, the reason why I was upset about the white background behind him before, which was a difference, is because the next panel is this aura farming shot in the dark, where the only light source is his gunshots and the absolutely monolithic explosion that happens with each shot, showing that he's not just packing any normal bullet in here. Instead, we get him just shooting a gun that looks like any other gun, with muzzle flashes that don't even look as detailed as the ones in The Sopranos. And instead of seeing an animation for the characters getting eviscerated by the absolute missiles he's firing out of this gun, we simply get a shot that is one-to-one with the manga, more or less, but realistically we want to see them being torn apart, not just a less detailed version of the manga panel. In this shot, when the tentacles fire through Zombieman's arms, we're supposed to see blood splatter from basically every entry and exit wound in his arms, but instead there is absolutely none. We get some black speckle, but that is it. It's not really blood. Not to mention that we can see a clear distancing from his original designs, where his eyes are far more wide and intimidating than the normal, really weird face he has drawn here. Vast differences between the designs of gun that he is using, and also the fact that there is no tears in his clothing. There was no change in design for each impact of the tentacles. His arms stay the exact same, and the images are just laid on top or behind the image that was already there to give the illusion they've changed something, when in reality they haven't. In the manga, we see his clothes tear on each entry point. In the manga here, we see the monster actually entering the corridor that Zombieman is in, not just breaking the wall from the other side and staying still. The manga actively shows the motion, while the anime does not. The next major difference is a cut panel, where in the manga, Zombieman has a retractable gun arm come out from his sleeve, putting a loaded handgun into his hand. Then he spins that gun around and shoots the monster. All the while, he's moving his arms so more blood is gushing out of the wounds that the tentacles had left. And he dodges tentacles while doing all of this. Not to mention, the chamber on his gun opens and the casing fires out in the manga. However, in the anime, this is not present at all. This shot of him looking through the monster is original to the anime, and actually acts as a pretty decent transition to the next panel. Although it's not much, it's nice to see an addition trying to help the transition between these panels. As we see here, Zombieman and the hole are in the right position, but when it comes to the monster, it isn't. The monster is supposed to be on the opposite side of Zombieman because he's pulled the tentacles from the source. It doesn't make sense that the entry wounds on his arm are what he's pulling out. Like, if he has to stand there and pull from the opposite side of his arm, he's actively pulling it the wrong way. He's pulling it deeper into his arm, so it doesn't make any sense. As you can see, there is no impact on his clothes either. Instead of having tears and actual bleeding and wounds, we just have black smudges. There is no need for me to describe why this is honestly, and this needs to be said, a pathetic adaptation of this scene. Zombieman and the monsters are on either side of this column. When Zombieman enters the column and the monsters are halfway through, we can see gore shooting out from both sides, and then the monsters are gone and Zombieman is walking on the other side of the column with smoke coming from his gun and his axe drenched in blood. In the anime, they disappear behind the column and nothing happens. Like, Nothing, literally nothing happens. All the monster body parts that are cut up in the background are completely blacked out. I assume that there was detail drawn. You can see that there is detail drawn on these models, but for some reason, oh, I don't know, maybe because they're trying to sell toys to kids, they've completely turned them pitch black and turned the blood that is 100% necessary to the scene to green, and the blood on Zombieman is black as well. This is actually insane. Here, they changed things around. Zombieman is walking down an empty corridor, but in the manga, he gets alerted as he's walking down, and he notices this is a corridor full of monsters, and the group of monsters try to negotiate with Zombieman and actively invite him to go kill one of the leaders of the Monster Association for them. Now, in the manga, I personally think it's very unclear as to this panel implies that he killed every monster in that room who said that to him, and he simply walked through the column that we saw in that panel. And then he walks down another corridor, which is also filled with monsters. And this is what I believe the anime here is trying to adapt. So we'll mark down a difference for every single panel that they just decided they didn't want to adapt, which was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now he's at this door, which is a also incredibly different panel in the manga. See, he is met with this exact same door, same style. The room is the exact same as it is in the anime. However, it's filled with monsters once again, all inviting him to go beat the monster at the other side of it and saying that they won't interfere. Zombieman sighs and actually agrees this time and creaks open the door. The door at the other side is pitch black, the only light being visible from the entrance he literally opened. However, in the anime, we can very clearly see the room he's in. And instead of the door staying open while the vampire is introduced, the door closes behind him and suddenly lights up, which just isn't in the manga either. In the manga, the door stays open, but damn. One of the coolest panels in the next 3 chapters is this one, where, essentially Dracula is landing, dust is pouring out from where he's about to step foot, and Zombieman is unfazed, with his tattered clothes blowing in the wind as he faces down his opponent. However, I will say, in the manga, Zombieman's clothes are suddenly fixed from the damage they took before. So, to be fair, in this case, it is pretty similar in the anime. The smoke is vastly different in detail, and the vampire is also missing an insane amount of detail. Not to mention his claws are the wrong color, his hair is the wrong shape, and he's supposed to have a very interesting color that, to be honest, is very hard to see if they've done in the manga because it's just so goddamn dark. The shit is like fucking last season of Game of Thrones levels of dark. Sure, there might be detail there, but because of all this goddamn censorship, we can't even see it. Not to mention, he has webbed fingers here for some reason. These monsters are supposed to be coming in from the still open door that Zombieman left open, and we're supposed to see all the detail in these characters instead of just red eyes and silhouettes. And we notice even more detail in which the vampire's hair is different, because he's got way more of it round back. Instead of this close-up of Zombieman, we're supposed to see a monster locking them in, setting the ultimatum that the monsters create for Zombieman. Either battle our leader and win, and then we'll kill you, or you'll lose to the leader and we'll kill our leader, because we hate him anyway. So whoever loses also loses. Now that we've got a close-up, we can actually see, yes, the color is a totally different style than it is in the manga. The manga has the frilly thing, but it doesn't go straight down, it goes all around his neck. And then the spiky colored part is supposed to go underneath that. However, that's not the way it is in the anime. Now, although this is relatively okay, I really despise this style where they do limited animation and then hold the image just so we can calculate what just happened because the animation was so unclear. But aside from that, this is pretty accurate. Once again, we see even more examples of censorship where blood is not present in someone biting into your goddamn neck. Zombieman is also supposed to stay entirely conscious throughout this panel, looking directly at the impact of the blow. This actually kind of adds a little bit of context in the manga. Zombieman isn't really fazed by someone biting into his neck. That should be a sign of something to come. However, in the anime, that's very unclear. Also, his nails are white, and they're not supposed to be. Yeah. He doesn't talk at all here after letting go of Zombieman. He simply throws him immediately to the ground after this close-up, because this close-up is just to show the reaction of the taste of the blood. Not to mention the lack in detail. We're not actually supposed to see all of Zombieman going completely limp here. we're supposed to see him actually rip a chunk out of Zombieman's neck, rather than just no blood and a little red mark where he bit into him. Something that is really weird is in this falling animation, they actually animate Zombieman's gun skidding across the ground and hitting the floor. Something I would usually praise, you know? Them doing a little extra embellishment. However, they forgot that these guns are attached to a system on Zombieman's sleeve that keeps them in his hand. And if not in his hand, they'll still be attached to that system, meaning that this gun never should have flown off, even though it is a nice addition animation-wise. But we can see in the manga that the gun never actually leaves his hands. Although he lets go of it in the next shot, we can see that the gun isn't on the ground near his body. You know what is though? A pile of blood, which isn't present in the anime. Nor is the gun that they animated falling. It's really weird to have this embellishment and not continue that embellishment in the rest of the animation. And his boots are supposed to have 101 buckles on them, but in the anime they just have 2. Not to mention the small droplet of blood that comes out of his shoulder is supposed to be a absolute fountain of blood pouring into the floor. And as I said earlier, his guns are supposed to be on this rail system, so suddenly Zombieman's gun spawns back into his hand. Another inconsistency with the anime. Also, another inconsistency is that this trigger here, well, you might notice it's blacked out when that's where his finger is supposed to go. So we're supposed to either see a hollow or his finger through it. They just colored it in so they wouldn't have to add any more of the detail. Not to mention the chambers on the guns here and here are supposed to open. So as this style of gun does when it's depleted and the magazine has been shot out. Another thing is, in order to display how fast he actually reloads, they show the magazines when they first extend fall out like this, and how he reloads before the first set of magazines even hit the floor. In the anime, that's not the case. They hit the floor, then he reloads. Which isn't what happens in the manga. The magazines drop out, then he wishes his guns back behind his back, pulling out the 2 extra magazines and throws them straight out in front of him before the magazines hit the floor. Then he reloads and shoots as soon as the magazines enter the gun itself. Although this is probably one of the coolest sequences in this episode, it is still lacking compared to the manga. We missed the chambers leaving the gun and the fact that the magazines have only just hit the floor. Now, they actually nerf my boy here because he flicks the bullets back towards Zombieman, and he does it at such speed that it goes straight through Zombieman's head and chest, as his body actually doesn't even react to the impact of them by falling back. Instead, almost looking like a vortex pulling straight through Zombieman's head and blowing his brains out the other side. But in the anime, we get this. Instead of that vortex and emotion we see in Zombieman, we get a few lines and a black circle. And a black circle in the chest too. And blood that is loosely linked to the fact that his whole ass back of his head is supposed to have been blown out here. Now, for some reason, the wounds that Zombieman suffered previously are back, which, to be fair, is also a correction on Murata's part too. But instead of seeing the hole in the back of his head and, well, his brain, the tattered clothes being destroyed, we get black marks with red stains on his clothes. One of these black marks is jittering a bit, showing that maybe he's healing, and the hole in his head is simply a black hole, which is insane because the hole in his head is the only part that's actually visible in the manga. The rest of his head and shoulders is completely blacked out. Suddenly he has the eyeliner he's supposed to have, the detail in the monsters in the background again, and I also just noticed that your man's pants, he's wearing tight trouser legs now instead of the aura farming dankula pants he's wearing in the manga. Although most of the details in this shot are very close to its manga counterpart, the hole in his head is the most important part to get right, and they didn't. And then for some reason in the anime we have him walking towards the vampire, and the vampire walking towards him. They come face to face, and Zombieman pulls his gun on him again. Now this is an embellishment that I don't mind because it's extra action. Please don't mind if I do. I can see that corners have been cut, But this could have made for a really well choreographed hand-to-hand scene, where instead of using blades or something, Zombieman is just trying to point blank shoot him with a gun. Doesn't make sense, but it could be the rule of cool. We also see a monster's head get absolutely destroyed with immensely more detail than Zombieman's head got destroyed. I don't know what the disconnect is here, because he's a monster, sure, but he's a humanoid. He looks like a goblin. He's just a guy. I don't understand why that's okay and showing the back of Zombieman's head isn't. But to be fair, it was entirely anime original sequence, and I'm happy to have it because it helps us transition into this next shot. Now, there is a panel that they missed. They missed the fact that Zombieman clenches up his arms, and that causes his pistols to enter back into his jacket sleeve, and then he pulls out his swords. In the anime, he simply puts his hands down by his wrist. You hear a click, he opens his hand, and then the pistol shoots up his sleeve from a side profile, rather than more dynamic angle we had in the manga. Just noticed his shoes are entirely different than they are in the manga, and there's no blood from the exit wound of, Zombieman's head getting blown off in the anime. For some reason, they add this really weird effect on Zombieman when his head gets turned around, and they don't actually show us in detail his head being twisted around. It's just his head's now pointing the opposite way, and it's super blurred. And we just cut to this panel here of his head being spun around, and they censor it by changing the colors, making it an inversion of what it's supposed to look like, while adding a glitch effect on it for some reason. It's such a weird way of censoring it. Although that animation was a little stiff, I'm glad to have seen it instead of just getting a cut to him holding the pistol. We're supposed to see detail in Zombieman's face here rather than just being, completely blank, but hey. But I'm glad that they actually show that there's no light in this room. In this panel in the anime, it's so clear. There's no other light. And you see the light perspective of this blast casting shadows really dynamically across the entire room. The biggest shadow being the vampire, because he's the one who's in front of the basically point of light. Few issues though. There's just no shadows, and I can't help but notice the hole that they create is hollow, and the blast is shooting out his back. Surely if the blast is going into the character, it's supposed to be in the hole as well. They skip a panel of him grabbing this monster's face and him reacting, going, oh, then getting torn into halves over the vampire's head. Now, they add this scene in the anime of Zombieman turning around and creaking back into normal position before he gives us this just reaction of him just not giving a crap. Which I love. I love that. Thank you. Embellishment that was needed. Minor animation that helps connect two scenes together. Now, Zombieman's head is supposed to be entered by these bats at 3 locations in the manga. One blowing out his entire left eye socket, one entering this sort of left side of his temple, and I believe one skimming off the top of his head. Not to mention one goes into his chest, rips through his arm, and essentially 101 other places, which is not visible at all in the anime. We have a black hole where it entered his eye, and his head changes shape weirdly. I don't know why. It doesn't indicate that a part of it was cut off in any capacity. Needless to say, it was insanely censored. Also, these bats are supposed to be lifting monsters up into the air and eating them mid-air, which is totally just not in the anime whatsoever. Still lost in the next shot, where we have missing blood from the axe as well as the rest of his body. They actually made the blood red, but then the blood that's around the body is purple for some reason. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Maybe they're trying to imply that, yeah, they're bloodstains from Zombieman when he was getting cut up. As we learn in a few seconds that he killed Zombieman a good few times before Zombieman finally got one on him. We're supposed to get a shot of him gripping hard onto the bar and then him bending them like this from this shot, but in the anime they just included all in the same shot. Is that blood on the axe? What? They did it! This is much better than anything else they've tried to do with Zombieman this episode. We see his ribcage. It is blacked out and so hard to see, unlike the manga, but it is open and we can see that. The strap on the tank top on the left shoulder also broken like it's supposed to be. Although his shoulder isn't chunked out like it's supposed to be and his head is entirely blacked out, at least we see that there's a huge chunk of his head missing. His left leg also isn't damaged really at all, unlike in the manga where it's hanging on by threads, and the same goes for the right leg. But honestly, This is probably the best shot of Zombieman's gore being visible in the episode, and it's really not good, but at least it's something. I've said to the people in my Discord, they're gonna black out everything in this episode because we've seen the censorship. We know it's going to happen. So at least seeing the side profile of his nose not fucking existing, it's something. And seeing the hole left in his head is also really quite nice as well, even if it's blacked out. Also, really surprised that they actually had his arm fall off. That's quite nice. Oh my god. In my video when I covered censorship, it was mainly about Zombieman's smoking and how it doesn't exist. He's supposed to pull out a cigarette here and reflect, you know, talk about stuff or whatever, as his arm has already started healing back on, showing just how good his healing factor is. But in the anime, he takes out a lollipop. He takes out a goddamn lollipop, and his arm looks like this, like Christ. But still, he's eating a lollipop instead of smoking, which is really, really quite annoying. Crap, there was this many differences today, by the way. This many. Hey, sorry this video was delayed, by the way. How about this? These videos kind of really blow to make. Recordings take like roughly 2 hours for the entire episode ones, and then you can kind of assume that the editing takes even longer. So you might be wondering how the hell I even managed to get those videos out on the day the anime released. And I was putting like 14-hour shifts on those videos, and the return just isn't there. Initially it was, but now it's just not. So I'm going to finish up this season doing these videos, but I don't think I will be doing the anime versus manga videos in this way for a while. Maybe later down the line, when I have more time to be able to edit each video, then 100% I could. But right now, nah, it's not going to happen. So in future, when I'm doing these sorts of videos, the anime versus manga ones, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out the main differences and then talk in detail about those. That way I can bring up who animated what and what stage in the process this might have gone wrong or done very well in its adaptation. Because next season is stacked with loads of really, really good anime. So I actually can't wait to bring this formula to those topics. But let me know any other anime that you might want me to cover with this genre. I'm thinking about Mob Psycho, continuing with one's content, but please let me know in the comments below. Epic.